Thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to share this interesting discussion. But before I start, I want to thank ECS for organizing this event, and thank you, Dr. Abla, for the welcoming spirit here, and the distinguished guests and the panelists. Again, I apologize for His Excellency Engineer Hassan Khatib for not being able to come today in this important discussion. But before I start, I would want to, not as an official government representative, but as an Egyptian, to thank Dr. Abla again for introducing the visit to the Grand Egyptian Museum today. I think it's our pride that we finally opened the museum. It might not be the largest or the most sophisticated, but for sure it's the most honorable museum, because the 100% of 100,000 artifacts belong to the Egyptian civilization, not borrowed from somewhere else. So I would want to encourage you to enjoy the visit. It's very challenging to speak at last, especially after all the distinguished guests have spoken, but let me look at it from a little bit different perspective. I think we all agree that we are at an inflection point where things are changing. It's not a matter of the current change, but the foreseen future, which is honestly bears a lot of ambiguity. We're looking at globalization as we've seen it for the past decade is sort of fading away. And this is a fact that we have to face. Globalization that created the economies of the Far East and the Chinas of the world today is facing an existential challenge. We're looking at, not as we've seen in terms of just-in-time manufacturing and supply chain efficiency, we're looking at more changing paradigm in terms of tariffs, in terms of borders, in terms of roaring calls even to dismantle the multilateral system altogether. This on its own represents a challenge. I was fortunate last month to be in the G20 by kind invitation from the government of South Africa, and WTO reform was on the top of the agenda, because we all agree that there are some changes that has to be done, but dismantling the multilateral system altogether would be no short of, I would say, utterly detrimental consequences. So Egypt's stance is clear. We stand behind the multilateral system because this is the one chance of having a balanced and fair and competitive landscape for all. Doesn't deny the fact that there are changes that has to be done in the institutions. The settlement system within the organization, among others, has to be looked at carefully. So what we need to look at is we need less words and more deeds. We need to act, because we might think that everyone wants change, but no one wants to change. There's a very big difference between both. And as Valerie mentioned about the consequences of the tariffs, maybe Egypt is the least impacted country in terms of numbers, but it's not only about the damage that will happen to Egypt, but the damage that will happen to the ecosystem altogether. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you need to go in company. So we need to go together, because at the end of the day, it's an interrelated system. So as much as there's a challenge that stands in front of us, there's also an opportunity. Maybe Charles Darwin was right in his book, Origin of Species, when he talked about adaptation and evolution. He didn't talk about the survival of the strongest. He said the survival of the fittest. So in Egypt, we see that there's a very strong debate between the East and the West, between the unipolar, multipolar, between US and China. I think we need to diligently assess, and we need to look at the competitive advantage that today Egypt brings. So we've acted already. We've taken steps into drafting, for the first time, Egypt's foreign trade policy to be put in place with the pillars and with the actions that we need to take. And we followed this policy with structural reform that has to be done on multiple layers, whether government organizations or entities that support the ecosystem altogether. We also looked at procedural changes that needs to be taken, because you cannot just dream of something that will happen in the medium and long term and you forget to acknowledge that there are gaps in the system that need to be filled, and they need to be filled urgently. Dr. Abla and the center helped us in assessing how we can, just to give you one example, how we can optimize the custom clearance time. And we had a very deliberate and objective and scientific assessment of what we started in December of last year, when we had more than 15 days of custom clearance time. Today we're at 5.8, and we're targeting 2 days before the end of the year. A single day of optimization would translate into $150 million of saving. That is the cost of inefficiency that we used to have. So again, looking at the holistic picture, there is change that is happening, and we need to acknowledge that, because change is the only constant in the universe. And you cannot shy away from acknowledging the fact that you will be impacted one way or the other. And you need to go together, and you need to work internally on what needs to be changed. And the last thing that I want to leave you with is that it might be, no, it's not might be, it's definitely easier said than done, but also that's not a short-term thing. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. We started it, and we're very much determined to continue the path. Thank you.